The Gospel reading. Now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, at the village of Mary and her sister Martha. So the sisters sent a message to Jesus, "Lord, he whom you love is ill." But when Jesus heard it, he said, "This illness does not lead to death. Rather, it is for God's glory, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it." Accordingly, though Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus, and after hearing that Lazarus was ill, Jesus stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Then Jesus told the disciples plainly, "Lazarus is dead. For your sake, I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us now go to him." When Jesus arrived, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that God will give you whatever you ask of him." Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha said to him, "I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day." And Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. And those who believe in me, even though they die, will live. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this?" She said to him, "Yes, Lord, I believe you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one coming into the world." Now when Mary came where Jesus was and saw him, she knelt at his feet and she said, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her also weeping, he was greatly disturbed in spirit, and he was deeply moved. Jesus said, "Where have you laid him?" They said to him, "Lord, come and see." And Jesus began to weep. Then Jesus, again greatly disturbed, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone was lying against it. And Jesus said, "Take away that stone." Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, "Lord, already there's a stench because he's been dead for 4 days." Jesus said to her, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone. And Jesus looked upward and he said, "Father, I thank you for having heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I've said this for the sake of the crowd standing here, so that they may believe that you sent me." When Jesus had said this, he cried with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." And the dead man came out, his hands and feet bound with strips of cloth, and his face wrapped in a cloth. Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go." Hear what the Spirit is saying to the church. Thanks be to God.
Would you pray with me? Oh God, may we all be messengers of the gospel of peace today and always. And now may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable in your sight. Amen. Okay, how many play golf? A lot. I must admit that I play only a little and not very well, and I don't understand it fully, though I'm learning. Bob has recently taught me, for example, the reason that he needs to buy so many putters is that they don't yet make one that floats. But I like to play now and then myself. I like the walk, I like the birds, trees, grass, and the snack hut on the turn. I may have told you before the story of playing golf with Bob one day when I had a short shot to the green. But between me and the green was a body of water. So I wound up, I took the shot and plunk right into the water. "Mulligan," Bob shouted from behind his customary place of safety, crouching behind the cart. And I had yet one more chance to get it right. And that's another reason I really like golf. It's a dream come true. Who doesn't like the idea of a do-over? From the Gospel of John this morning, we hear the story of Lazarus, the story of another chance, a life mulligan, if you will, a second shot at it. In the story, we hear that Jesus calls, "Lazarus, come out." And out of the cold, dark, dank tomb stumbles a surprised Lazarus, still bound up in the grave cloths and blinking in the sun, granted miraculously a second chance and a new life. Now, I will tell you, I've been to Lazarus's tomb. I've actually visited the spot where it is thought to be the site of the tomb of Lazarus, the place that he was called out to new life. I first visited it years ago when I spent a month in Israel on an archaeological dig, and I had opportunities to travel around Israel. The biblical town of Bethany sits just a few miles outside of Jerusalem, and the tomb sits right in the center of the modern village of Bethany, and it's a popular tourist destination. The day that I was there, the tourist load was light, so we not only stood outside the tomb, but we were allowed to enter it. And so after passing the door, we walked down about 15 steps into that cold, dark cave, and it was really eerily quiet in there, and so because of the unique aura of the place, we all really fell silent. And then our guide, from way out past the opening somewhere, started to shout, "Come out, Lazarus, come out." And we stumbled up those gravelly, dark steps, drawn to that distant voice that echoed past the entrance of the tomb. We walked up and out into the amazing light and warmth of the day again and blinked a little dazed. And it was an amazing and unforgettable experience to relive, in part, an amazing and unforgettable story. The raising of Lazarus is actually the last of 7 miracle stories in the Gospel of John, and they all have something kind of critical in common that I think we shouldn't miss. Let me show you what I mean. The first miracle Jesus performs is at the wedding at Cana, when Jesus turns water into wine. But this miracle is not just about radically altering the nature of things by changing a common tasteless drink into a celebratory one. It's also about something deeper, of course. It's about his power to transform what is common and tasteless in our own lives into something worth celebrating. And each of the miracle stories is like that. Each involves a sign that points to a bigger truth than just the miracle recorded. It's also about us. So Jesus doesn't just make bread for 5,000 hungry people. He is the bread for them and for us. He doesn't just cure blindness in someone else. He's capable of opening even our eyes. And he can do all these things because of who he is. And who is he? Who is Jesus? Well, Jesus is God's own emissary, we're told, his son, and through him God will go to any lengths, miraculous lengths, to demonstrate the power of love. Jesus is love at work. And with each of these 7 miracle stories in John's Gospel, we see love at work, and with each successive miracle going to greater and greater lengths to show the irresistible power of that love, and especially when it goes to work on us. In today's story here in Bethany at the raising of Lazarus, this is Jesus' last try, really, at demonstrating the power of love at work before he goes on to Calvary. And the story tells us that Lazarus seems to have been taken suddenly ill, for no good reason, all too soon, and then to have died, but been called back to life. So, what does that mean for us? Does it mean anything to you? Can you connect at all with this miracle of Lazarus, a new life provided to demonstrate the power of God's love? Well, maybe not. Unless you've ever tasted the dusty, stale emptiness like death. Have you ever been there? I got to count myself fortunate, as I've said, to have been in the actual tomb of Lazarus and stood in it and been called out physically. But I would have to say that I've been there in another way too, in a way just as life-altering and soul-stirring. Life doesn't always follow a pattern or plan that we expect, does it? After all, Lazarus was alive and well, apparently, when life suddenly took a fatal turn and he wound up in the tomb. Such things happen to us, too. An ominous medical report comes. A child takes a path we never expected. A friend turns their back on us. A dream fails to materialize. We've lost a beloved spouse, or a relationship just goes wrong. These fatalities of hope or expectations or dreams can take us to our own living tombs. Have you ever taken up residence in a tomb hewn from the rock by one of those devastating experiences? I've been there, and chances are you have too. You may know that vice-like grip of depression or dejection or discouragement, what it does to your mind and spirit. You may know how debilitating this is. Looking back on the time I spent in the tomb, I realize I probably didn't notice the signs that life was going to take this downward twist and kill so much joy and hope in me. We can't always anticipate these, can we? But suddenly, we're just there, in that cold, dark, sightless, airless, barren tomb-like place. You can't breathe in there. But you don't want to. What's the point? You know, I've seen other people slip into that barren cell, and sometimes they rant and rave in the tomb of their disappointment. Some blame and argue and roar and scold and cry. And I don't know about you, but that wasn't my way. When I wound up in the tomb, I just sealed it up from the inside. I put some top-grade weather stripping all around every crack that no light or air could get in there, and I just settled down in my misery with all the dead memories and dashed hopes piled up in heaps at my feet, and I was good and buried. Fortunately, I had the good sense to take myself to a monastery one day, and Sister Mary, who ran the retreat house, apparently watched me sit in the chapel, as still and unmoving as the death in my heart, and she stopped by to talk with me. She listened with perfect respect and compassion to my tale and my disappointment that God hadn't come to my rescue. He hadn't saved me from this lifelessness. Well, she listened, but finally you can't be subtle when you need to call someone out of their tomb. Jesus shouted to Lazarus, and Sister Mary was pretty blunt with me too. She reminded me that while it was true that God had not saved me, I was, after all, expecting perhaps the wrong miracle. God's love, she said, isn't a pampering love. It's so much better than that. It's a perfecting love. And that evening, when I came back from dinner to my room at the retreat house, she had tucked under my door a little poem by Lee Weber. It's called Crossings, and it goes like this. I came to the swift raging river, and the roar held the echo of fear. O Lord, give me wings to fly over if you are, as you promised, quite near. But he said, trust the grace I am giving, all pervasive, sufficient for you. Take my hand and we'll face this together. But my plan is not over, but through. Sister Mary had it right. God's love isn't a pampering love, it's a perfecting love. But it can't work its way with us so long as our hearts are in some cold, stony tomb shut up and guarded. We have to be willing for that perfecting love to reach us by answering the voice of Christ that calls us to come on out into the light of day, where we'll find ourselves right in Christ's presence, where we can learn and grow and be healed. Now, I've got to admit that there's a vulnerability to stepping out from our usual places of hiding and out into the light. We might come out from our usual hideaways blinking a little at the unaccustomed brightness, looking a little pale, a little wobbly. But that's a risk worth taking, isn't it? If we can encounter the healing Spirit of Christ out there and let its love go to work on us. Now, I don't know if you've ever walled anything off or shut anything away, or if you have any dead spots in your life. I don't know what you might be harboring in some sealed up place that you could let out into the light of day. But I do know this. We human beings are called to second chances and third and fourth and fifth chances, if need be, by a God who loves us and walks with us and goes through the hardships and trials with us. This great love of God doesn't shield us exactly. It doesn't pamper us. And we can get cut and bruised and battered and disappointed and even deeply hurt. But the great love of God, all the while, is trying to have its way with us, smoothing out the rough edges, softening, working away at us, perfecting us. It's there. It's there to see us through anything. This is powerful stuff, this love of God. I've known people who have let God's love have its way with them for years, and they've grown to reflect that great, bright, eye-dazzling light of God's love themselves, because they've let themselves bask in it and be saturated by it, and then they reflect it back. That love, when you let it reach you and touch you, is absolutely, irreversibly transformative. It's miraculous, really, because when you keep walking towards that light closer and closer, after a while, the undimmable glow of eternity just starts to shine a little through you. So you see what this means. And this is crucial to understanding the story of Lazarus, I think. The point here is that any death, even the ultimate physical death, is finally small and insignificant by comparison to the powerful, death-conquering love God calls us to receive, to come and receive. Love wins. Love is abroad and at work in our world, trying to have its way with us. Now, I know it's a sobering thought, this admission that death looms large and small. Deaths will come, but Lazarus' story, his story, is meant to be profoundly reassuring to us, because after all, God's love wins. When Lazarus steps out of his untimely tomb to a second chance at life, we all have a preview of what's going to happen when Jesus goes to death at the cross and to his own untimely tomb. Love can't be held, extinguished, or killed. Love wins. And that's meant to be a preview for us too. For us too. Whenever and however the tomb has seemed to claim us. Walter Wankerin was a green young minister when he started visiting one of his parishioners, Jocelyn, in the hospital. She was a 40-year-old woman dying of cancer. He said that the first several visits he considered it his duty to bring Jocelyn some cheerful words, So he spoke to her brightly of the tennis he had just played and the flowers blooming outside, and she never said a word to him. But one day, he said, as he blathered on, she rolled her wide, serious eyes up to his face, pointed a bony finger at him, and said, "Shut up." So he learned, he said, the insufficiency of his pastoral technique. He learned that all the babble about happy things he had to offer couldn't penetrate the lonely, sad doubt and despair of a life ending too soon for no good reason. There aren't there, times in life when cheerful words just don't ring very true, when pat answers won't suffice for us, when nothing we can do can overturn the death sentence that life has pronounced. So Pastor Wangren learned humble silence in the face of that. He came then week by week, and he just sat with Jocelyn, silent. One day, though, finally, he said, the lesson of the long, tomb-like silence finally came to him. Maybe it was Christ's Spirit calling into every dark and desperate and lifeless place, calling out in love. Wangren knew then, he said, what to say. He said just 3 words to Jocelyn. Quietly and simply, he said, "I love you." And she rolled her wide, bright eyes to him one last time, put out her arms, and he hugged those dying bones. And she whispered to him, peacefully, the first words she had spoken in days. "I love you too," she said. You see, God knows there is an irresistible power to love. And we have the chance to offer it to others who need it sometimes desperately. And we have the chance to know the powerful, healing, and transformative love of God ourselves, now, always. And we are all too foolish, I think, if by pride or fear or doubt or blindness we hide ourselves away someplace, if we don't allow ourselves to be enveloped by love, hugged by it, perfected by it, re-enlivened by it. So how do we hear the call of Christ and find our way out, stumbling from our tombs to receive love? Well, here's what I think. I think we take a first tentative step, and then a second, and a third. We share our deepest concerns with those we respect. We forgive, and we offer forgiveness in return. We serve instead of forever wanting service for ourselves, and we start to give love with every fiber of our feeble, straining hearts. We love something. We love someone. We love ourselves. Those, I think, are the steps out of the tombs of depression or addiction or anger or bitterness or grief or whatever else sends us to those dark, lifeless places. And listen, there are endless do-overs, folks, until we get out of the tombs. Take all the mulligans you need, but do keep at it. Take a step, and then another into the new life God gives you every day, always. Take the gift. Amen.